If Kemi Badenoch was expecting an invitation later this month to celebrate Burns Night among Scottish Tories, she can forget it. First, Baroness Davison, the former leader of the Conservatives north of the border, put the Ruth into ruthless by hinting that her Conservative boss was lazy. Then, as Britons were preparing to bring in the new year, Brian Monteith, a former member of the Scottish and European parliaments, penned an article for the Scotsman newspaper, listing his criticisms of Badenoch's performance as leader. Monteith was appalled that Badenoch had allowed the festive period to be dominated by her pointless squabble with Nigel Farage over the Reform Party's membership increase. All Badenoch had done, Monteith noted, was to help more people to know that Reform had outstripped the number of Conservative members. According to Monteith, the Tory leader had alerted voters to the fact that despite being under new management, the Conservatives appear to still be clueless and in decline. Monteith then aimed his dagger at Badenoch's throat. This huge political misjudgment points to a deeper concern about the character and temperament of Kemi Badenoch, he wrote. Bright and intelligent she appears to be, but does she have the patience, guile, and good judgment to prevent Farage becoming the dominant representation of opposition to Labour? If Badenoch can get such a small matter so wrong, how might she behave when the issues become really tough? Badenoch's behavior points to a continued inability to confront why the Conservatives lost so badly. She remains in denial about the past Tory government's record and retains an unjustified and toxic sense of entitlement. This is not quite on a par with Geoffrey House Commons' resignation speech, but it is a pretty strong attack on a leader who has been in place for just 2 months. Monteith saved his best for last. Badenoch must change, or she will not be leader in 2026, he thundered. So, the clock is definitely ticking on Badenoch's leadership. Former UKIP MEP Patrick O'Flynn also joined in the chorus of disapproval, chastising Badenoch, this time in a Spectator magazine article, for her poor decision-making. The North West Essex MP doesn't so much keep falling into Farage traps as leap into them headfirst, he wrote. Were these media attacks coordinated? Are they just the beginning of a long-predicted slew of press articles questioning Badenoch's leadership credentials in the run-up to the local elections? Over at The Guardian, deputy political editor Jessica Elgett pressed the calm button when offering her analysis of the huge task facing the Conservative leader this year. Badenoch is not boring, Elgett said reassuringly, but there was a concern among a lot of people that she is a loose cannon. She finds it very difficult to let things go, and that's not a great asset in a leader. For those who may be keeping score, in just 2 months Badenoch has been variously described as lazy, politically naive, clueless, and charmless. The Tory leader is in denial. She is entitled, a loose cannon, a grudge-bearer, temperamental, and guileless. There are concerns about Badenoch's character, but at least she is said to be bright and intelligent. Elgett also identified another flaw in Badenoch's makeup. Kemi hates journalists, and hates being interviewed, and just isn't prepared to do short clips and all the sort of stuff that opposition leaders have to do to keep from being forgotten, Elgett declared. And because she hates journalists, she often comes across as irritated. So that's something she will need to address. Elgett went on to warn Badenoch that she has to carve out her own identity and prove why she's just as interesting a leader as Farage. So, the number of items on Badenoch's to-do list appears to lengthen by the day. In addition to building better relations with the press, Badenoch must not only take on and defeat Nigel Farage, but also prove to be more interesting than the wizard of British politics, who has been in the public eye for 25 years. To realize such an achievement, Badenoch will need a credible position on immigration that steals some of Reform's thunder but doesn't scare off her party's business constituency. Scoring notable points in the weekly Westminster soundbite battle with the Prime Minister is also a priority. Energizing the Tory party is important too, if Badenoch is to maintain her position as leader. But perhaps, above all these important demands, Badenoch must prioritize earning the right to be heard by the British public, especially with the local election campaign due to start this spring. Badenoch built her successful leadership bid on her claim to being an engineer with the talent to build, and on her respect for conservative principles. What Badenoch needs to do, and soon, is to fashion a new conservatism that connects with voters. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher promoted her vision of a shareholding democracy, selling off council housing to working-class families, and shares in newly privatized state assets, to anyone who could afford them. John Major, the son of a bus driver, hoped that his period in office would cement Britain's move towards a classless society. David Cameron talked about the big society, a mix of free market principles and compassionate conservative ideas. And Rishi Sunak, just by being the first Prime Minister of Asian heritage, hoped that he symbolized a new Britain and a new Tory party. So, what is Kemi Badenoch's conservative vision of modern Britain? Can she define a new conservatism that draws a line under Cameron's 6 years of austerity and the chaos of Johnson and Truss to meet the future challenges of the country? Badenoch is on record as saying that her conservatism is influenced by Roger Scruton and the writings of the American economist Thomas Sowell. Can these two theoreticians help her to fashion a new and compelling party platform that will win back the lost Tory voters? The Tories' brand identity is smaller government, low taxes, and law and order, with nationalism baked in. Liz Truss' uncosted and calamitous dash for growth means that any attempt to offer tax cuts to the electorate will be pounced upon by the Labour government as a danger to the public finances. The privatization cupboard is bare, so how will future tax breaks for the rich be paid for? If Badenoch favors some form of trickle-down economics as her big idea, how will this be financed? Should Badenoch seek inspiration from the economic programs of the center-right in other countries, she will find parties experiencing the same difficulties as her own conservatives. Over the past decade, many center-right parties have sunk into states of despair. In order to remain electable after the financial crash of 2008, many began stealing themes closely associated with ultranationalist groups to their right, signing their own death warrants in the process. Voters remembered that these were the same center-right parties that had supported the very policies that had placed their economies on the brink of financial ruin. In office, center-right parties could only offer the electorate permanent austerity and rubber-stamp the end of the generational contract. Worse, they had little to say. As low-skilled jobs evaporated, semi-skilled employment went overseas and welfare services declined. Germany's conservatives face a strong challenge from the populist AfD in the country's general election next month. The once mighty Republicans in France are irrelevant and in disarray, after winning less than 5% of the popular vote at the 2022 general election. Italy's center is imploding, with hard-right populists now in government. The electoral marginalization and defeats of the center-right are not only a reflection of the failure of neoliberal promises, but also a measure of just how quickly voters have accepted the ultranationalist analysis of the failure of center-right politics. Over the past decade, political whiteness, banished as genocidal mayhem for decades, in the wake of Hitler's concentration camps, America's Jim Crow segregation and South African apartheid, has been rehabilitated as an acceptable ideology. The aging of the white population, and the low fertility rate among white women, have generated an existential fear that white people could go the way of the dodo. The hard right answer to this potent anxiety is the appeal to white voters to reject the grand bargain that has dominated Western politics for the past 50 years, a deal offered by mainstream parties from the left and the right. Ultranationalists claim that white voters were offered the incentives of rising prosperity, home ownership, and a middle-class lifestyle if they accepted diversity and the presence of former colonial subjects on British soil. Those same black people had been encouraged to migrate to the metropole, with the offer of work, training, and enrichment. They were to take their places in a de facto caste system, with the minimum of disruption. Once settled in their new homeland, these black people began to contest the terms of their deal, their resistance carrying the slogan, "No justice, no peace." Meanwhile, some white people were going cold on the terms of their bargain too, but their influence was limited. Until now. According to the hard right, the deal grudgingly accepted by whites has become too complicated and too costly. The white backlash against the grand bargain also reflects a deeper, underlying Western anxiety about the clash between the old and the young. This dispute has raged since time began. However, now the confrontation pits organized, powerful, aging and predominantly white stakeholders against more numerous, vigorous and resource-hungry younger people who are mainly black and brown and who wish urgently to have their way. Few Western politicians are addressing the need for reconciliation between these opposing forces, leaving the way clear for social destabilization, the open return of white racial fearmongering and the spectacular ascent of hard-right political parties. White anxiety exploded into the open with the UK riots of last July. The subtext to the endless commentary on migrants, crime and other themes linked to Britain's diversity by GB News, Talk TV, Matt Goodwin and other hard-right media outlets is: can a black woman, raised in Nigeria and now leading the Tories, really understand the rejection of the grand bargain and formulate the policies needed to replace it? This is the challenge that Kemi Badenoch must meet as Conservative leader if she is to save her political skin. It was more than good politics for Badenoch to call for a full national inquiry into the rape gang scandal, knowing that it would be well received by Reform voters. The support Badenoch offered to Robert Jenrick, after he described Britons of Pakistani origin as people from alien cultures, may have fulfilled the same purpose. Jenrick's views were just the hard line that Reform voters would have appreciated. This appalling affair is the final nail in the coffin for Liberals who still cling to the argument that Britain is an integration success story, Jenrick wrote on X. Samuel Kasumu, a former advisor on race issues to Boris Johnson, said Jenrick's comments were highly divisive and risked people getting killed. But Badenoch disagreed, slapping down Kasumu in the most forthright terms. This nonsense of attacking anyone with a different viewpoint has to stop, Badenoch wrote. We must be free to have tough conversations, no matter how difficult that may be to hear. We need moral courage, not silencing of debate through personal attacks. This is a classic example of why politicians stop being honest with the public, and the problems have stacked up over decades. The Conservative Party is under new leadership, and that means confronting difficult truths. There will be more issues where Badenoch and the Conservatives are tempted to strike out in a Reform direction. The trouble with courting the Reform vote is that the party's supporters may already have decided they prefer the whiff of sulfur that comes with Nigel Farage. Jean-Marie Le Pen, the late French National Front leader, summed up perfectly the situation Badenoch faces when reflecting on his own political battles with an opponent. Le Pen said of his adversary, he prefers to be elected on our ideas, rather than fight for his own. In general, people prefer the original to the copy. Thank you for listening to this podcast from our master's blankets. We are delighted to have had your attention. Please like and share this podcast. And whilst you're here, consider subscribing to this channel. This helps us to keep going and to reach more people with detailed updates on Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Conservative Party and the challenges she faces. See you next time.